are so happy to have you on with us today because this show is fascinating. When we just start getting into it, I know, Michael, you've been fascinated by the subject for a while, but for those of us that know less details about this, it's just a wild thing to get into, and I can see why it's been sort of something that's been in your brain for decades now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I came to LA in the 1980s, and this case was like kind of a real attention grabber. Part of my learning about LA was learning about this crime. I was a reporter in this town, and I kind of was around the edges of this case, but I also lived in Laurel Canyon for a while and knew this house. So it's always been a little weird thing of a fascination to me, and it was really fun and interesting, accent on interesting, to come to the story decades later and be able to tell it in as fully as I think it's ever been told, with the cooperation of so many people, at least all the people that are still alive.
Yeah. Yeah, and Allison, it's got to be interesting for you too. Of course, the last series that we talked to you about, is a little bit lighter, right?
Yeah, I mean, I came to this project on the heels of doing the Laurel Canyon
Hmm.
Place and Time music series, and it was this beautiful, idyllic place with this beautiful music being created. And by the early by 81, the scene had become the negative image of it. The houses were filled with, drug gangs, and, it had completely flipped over into something completely different. And that's, a big part of what we want to do in this story, is help Los Angeles be part of the story as well, what was going on there.
Hmm. And I know there's got to be so many fascinating conversations that you had, and it was great to see it just from the start and to the end. But was there a particular person that you spoke to, or a particular conversation that just really kind of had a maybe an aha moment for you about the case?
For me, it started with Scott Thorson. So one of the detectives who plays a big part in the documentary and the case is Rick Jackson, who I've known for going on 30 years. And he had mentioned Scott Thorson a few times, basically saying, this is a guy who seems to come in and out of my professional life as a cop all the time. And he's pretty fascinating and strange, and he's a character, and he just suggested that I talk to him. And at the time he was in prison in Nevada. And so I set up one of these kind of video calls and talk to him to see how much he would reveal. I mean, he's told his story in bits and pieces, from going on, from anywhere from being in court as a sworn witness to being on, PTL and as a supposed evangelist. But he's never really kind of sat down and been pinned down on the stuff. And so after a few video meetings in while he was in prison, I decided to do a podcast on Wonderland, and I was halfway through that when we started thinking, like, this is quite a good visual story, and there's a lot of archival stuff that we could use, and so that's when we started thinking about it as a documentary, and we got lucky when Allison, who is, as she said, just finishing up the bucolic side of Laurel Canyon, said she would be interested in doing the flip side.
Hmm. And Allison, Allison, which one was it for you? Which interview which was kind of like, oh, this is going to be a great episode?
I mean, they were all, integral interviews, honestly, but, it was Scott was our main priority, and he was one of the first people we got on camera, and it was no easy feat, because we knew that the story was going to revolve around him eventually, that he becomes such a key element, and in the tangents that the story takes that broaden out, Scott's critical, like the whole crack cocaine thing that enveloped Los Angeles was, Eddie Nash and Scott Thorson were way ahead of everybody else getting into that. And it was just, and the damage that was done from that. So it's just everything that Scott, said was just, on the one hand, so unbelievable. And it was fun to see Michael sort of get the information, piece it all together. But getting Mitzi Roberts at the end, especially to open up the original murder book, that was like, we were hoping for that moment all along. And she finally agreed to do it at the very end. So it was great.
Yeah. Now, both of you have had fascinating careers so far, and people look up to you and they think, see, this is what I want to do. But you guys just make it look easy. So, what kind of advice would each of you give to somebody that wants to follow in your footsteps?
Just stick with it. Perseverance.
Yeah. Don't talk about it, do it. You know, I went off and did fiction for 25 years, and this is kind of a return to telling true stories, a form of journalism. And my first step was in podcasts, and you don't need a lot to tell a story. You need a recorder, and almost anyone can do a podcast. It doesn't mean you're going to get an audience. But when I started, I did 3 podcasts before we moved into doing documentaries. And, I did them in my garage. I recorded them in my garage, and it was, so it was just kind of like, I want to tell this story, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
good stories and good characters are the other key element, and to do something you truly believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, my co-host Drew Pearson, one of our great Dallas Cowboys, got the Hail Mary, win the Hall of Fame. He wanted me to make sure that I asked both of you your Hail Mary moment, which is that moment in your life or career where you just had to go for it and it worked out for you. What do you suppose that was for each of you?
Well, for
Wow.
me, I had a cozy job. This is when the newspapers were fat and happy. I had a job at the time, the highest circulation newspaper in the country, at the LA Times. I didn't go wanting. I had great crime stories to write about, but I was writing fiction on the side, and it wasn't doing that great. But I felt like I had to pick one of these paths and either become the best reporter I could be or become the best novelist I could be, because it was dividing my thing. And so I took a flyer and quit my newspaper business and figured I could last about 18 months.
Mm.
So I really had to write a good novel that would increase my profile. And so I guess that would be the Hail Mary I took.
Yeah. How about for you?
Strangely, I've always known what I wanted to do from when I was a really little kid. I wanted to be a photojournalist. I was obsessed with National Geographic, and it just naturally turned into documentary filmmaking. I can't say that, each project is sort of an aha moment when you figure out how to tell it properly.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, last thing, I know that people are fascinated by these things, by true crime. What is it that you suppose that people just keep coming back for more and more of this, and why is the popularity of this growing right now?
Well, for me, I mean, I spent my whole life in crime in various levels, from journalism to fiction to now documentary podcast. And I have my own fascination with it. And I think it's because you're brought in. It's almost like it can be science fiction almost. Most of the viewers of this have never solved murders. I've never solved a murder, but by watching or researching and doing these, you get taken into these worlds where the stakes are pretty high. There's always something that's surprising about humanity, and that really kind of keeps you plugged into this genre.
I mean, for
Absolutely.
me, true crime, this is sort of my first foray into the genre, and it's why we wanted to take a real noir visual stylistic approach. I mean, I generally find on the TV side of it to be kind of gratuitous at times and sensationalized, and frankly, I don't watch too much of it because it scares me too much. I love reading true crime and I love Michael's books, but watching it, it is sort of too scary for me generally.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for your time today, and thank you for making
Sure.
something so fascinating and interesting. I tell everyone to check out and look forward to talking to you both again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see
Okay,
you.
thank you so much.